Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutra Bhashya Kritau Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punah Ishwaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Vasudeva Vasudam Devam Kansa Chanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Just requesting the other panelists to please show the video. Uh, okay, so I was ending the last class with something that might have been a little bit esoteric, which is the bow and arrow analogy and the image in sadhana. It's very common in Vedanta. Another way to get to that analogy, to understand these analogies, is just for us to go back once for the basic questions that drive Vedantic inquiry. So the basic questions are: who am I? The basic questions are anything anybody who's intelligent and curious might ask, even if they didn't know any Vedanta. They just ask these questions: who am I? What is all this that surrounds me? Who is responsible for all this? Okay, this is all very basic questions that occur to anybody who has got inquisitive mind and curious, and also some experience that allows you to have that sense of wonderment. Around you there is a manifoldness, there is a incredible variety around you that is the basis of all transactions. Transactions themselves, to transact, means you have to be an environment which has got differentiation and variety and change. If you have something that is not differentiated at all, and if there is no variety and nothing changes, then you can't transact. So when you transact, you're giving and taking, or you're putting, you're removing. That means always something is changing. And so around you, in order to let you transact, in fact, in order for transactions to become meaningful at all, you have an incredibly dynamic world around you. And that world is always changing. And that world of intense change uh, very often uh, appears to us to be overwhelming, because it's always in front of us. We are trying to deal with it, and the changing world is always seeming to attack and overwhelm us. So it seems. And so, as good sadhakas, when the changing world attacks and overwhelms me, who do I head to for help? I head to God. Oh God, save me. Okay. So we are in this relationship with the world. We feel it's a, it's a as you get more experience and you sort of go through the highs and lows of life, you feel you are very victimized by the world. You are the victim of the world. You are the victim, and the world, with all its manifoldness and variety, is the tormentor. The world is tormenting you. So you are the victim, the world is the tormentor, and who is going to save you? It is God. So you have the Triputi. Triputi is a triad. Triputis are very common in all over Vedanta. The Triputi normally means something different, but here it's merely a triad. It is a three three-cornered triangle. You against the world, imploring God to be on your side in this battle when you are against the world. Imploring God to be on your side. And why is the world tormenting you? If you ask a good Vedantic student, why does the world tormenting you? If they have been through all the basic Vedanta, they'll answer very easily. Well, the world is tormenting me because that is my prarabdha. Somewhere in karma, many, ananta janma sampaptam, so many janmas have gone through, accumulated so much karma, and somewhere a certain portion of that karma has been given to me to work out in this janma. And clearly at the moment, the prarabdha is bad. So the world is taking use of that prarabdha, and my prarabdha gives an open invitation to the world to torment me. That's why the world is tormenting me. It's my prarabdha. In fact, one might even end over here, and one might go into a pretty fatalistic approach when I give you this idea. Your approach becomes, Acha, I have all this karma, and my karma is there in prarabdha, and when my prarabdha is bad, the world is allowed to torment me. What are my options when the world is to torment me because of prarabdha? What are my options? I only have one option. I have to pray at the feet of the Lord to help me out with this terrible prarabdha at this moment. But I also have another option. I have the option to exercise my free will and to fight my way out of the situation. So now suppose the prarabdha is going to allow the world to torment me. What is the sense in me trying to fight my way out of the situation? After all, prarabdha is what it is. So at a particularly despondent moment in Rama's life, Rama also begins to think like this. So Vasishta needs to help him out of the situation. So Vasishta gives him the Vedantic approach to this, which is a very brave approach. He says, Rama, you see, when it comes to life situations and with prarabdha is tormenting you, every life situation is a battle. And the way you think about it is, this is Vasishta saying and not me saying. Vasishta is saying to Rama also, not to you. Vasishta is saying to Rama. So Vasishta is saying to Rama, in a life situation, if you find a life situation, imagine that life situation, there are two rams. You know, rams are male sheep with big horns. There are two rams who are going to fight each other in each situation in your life. One ram is your prarabdha, and the other ram is your purushartha, your effort of your free will. And in every battle, which ram wins? Anybody in the panelists can tell me which ram wins in every battle?
Stronger one.
The
Anyone
strong,
can win.
the stronger one wins. And in every situation, there is no telling which ram will be stronger. There is no telling in any situation how strong that prarabdha is going to be there, whether you can push it back or not through your purushartha. But the meaning of your life is to always try. And so you do your ram as strong as possible, and the other ram will fight as best as possible. And this is how you grow. This is your life. This is your dharma. This is the dharma of a manushya. This is the manushya sharira that you have. So this is a tremendously dynamic example, because they say that it's clear that Vasishta, who is a Brahmagyani, is not counseling Rama just because he's a Kshatriya. Neither is he counseling Rama to live a passive life. He is asking Rama to live an engaged and fulfilling life like this. So this is the analogy of the battle, and it is that aspect of this analogy is being used to explain how to attack the whole situation to get beyond the victim, tormentor, savior complex that you're running after all the time. And in fact, what we were talking about last time was perhaps a more esoteric approach to consider this same set of circumstances: the victim, the tormentor, and the savior. So the victim here, the individual, is the individual soul. He becomes the arrow in the analogy I told you. Then there is the set of external and local circumstances of your life, which seems to torment you. The entire Jagat, with all the circumstances of your life, it might well torment you, but it is in fact a universal force which is brought together in a particular way by your life. The external force is there. It is the force of the universe is out there. But in your life, it is brought together by your life in a particular way that has relevant context to you. You go out in the world is what it is. It is an entirely different thing for different people. The entire universal forces are strung together by the circumstances of my own life. That is the bow and the pratyancha, the strung bow. The strung bow, which is taut and harnesses the entire universal force into a potential energy ready to launch you. On this bow, you place the arrow of the individual soul and you let it shoot, and you aim yourself. When you aim yourself, you orient yourself to take the force of the universal forces and shoot towards the Paramatma, the oversoul. Brahma Tallaksham Uchyate. And when you shoot and you go there, you don't shoot there and then you don't hit it and you fall. You become tanmaya with it. You penetrate and you merge into it. That is the Brahmatma Jivatma Aikya. So this is the analogy, this is the dynamic analogy of the bow and the arrow that is given in the Mandukya. So in this upasana of chitta, your living consciousness, you have to be very careful from the beginning, which is why the Upanishad says, Apramattena vedavyam. Apramattena. Don't have pramada. Don't have neglect. Don't lose the sense of alertness and poise at any moment, because the world is coming at you all the time. Those forces are dynamically always there, and you are ever ready to be launched as the arrow. Apramattena vedavyam sharavat tanmayo bhavet. Like the arrow that penetrates into the target and goes deep into it, sharavat, like the arrow, tanmayo bhavet. Always find the time, always use every circumstance to bring yourself into and merged into the oversoul of the Paramatma. So this mind, this chitta that is so important in preparing this arrow has to be handled very carefully. It is not a beast that you can just beat it into submission, or some wild animal that you can cage it and control it. The mind has to be handled lovingly and firmly. Okay, because the mind is a very subtle thing. It is, if you read things like Tattva Bodha, you will understand the mind stuff is made of very, very subtle stuff. And, you can't do it like, you know, I don't know if in Abu it's quite common. If you've seen these people, many of you might have gone to a hill station or something, or some beach, and you see the tourists, waiting to go for a ride uh, on the horse. And of course, tourists, when they go, they are in a great mood and they imagine themselves to be great horse riders. But the moment, actually, from the horse is a very sensitive animal. So the moment you put your feet on the stirrup and you try to get onto the saddle in this awkward way, because naturally getting onto saddles and stirrups is not something we do every day. Once it does that, the horse instantly knows that this guy has nothing to do with horse riding. They know that. So you might try to be a hero and look good and have a hat and all, but the horse knows your incredible limitations. Of course, then if the horseman is there, he's slowly taking the horse, you go. But then if you say, no, 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 horseman, I don't need, and after all, I'm a great horseman, you start trying to do this, and you imagine you're in a Western movie and you start making sounds and riding the horse. Before you know it, that guy is fallen off, that tourist. Fortunately, it's a sandy beach. Nothing happens to him. Because the horse knows this. And that if the tourist is going to try some tricks, the guy says, like, what tricks are you trying? You just have no idea how to handle a horse. So, the and then the guy will complain, you gave me a bad horse, but not the bad horse. It's the rider that is bad. So, same thing happens with the mind when you try to sit for meditation. The moment you sit down, okay, the way you sit and you adjust, the mind immediately knows that this is not going to work. The mind knows. The mind is very, very smart. Um, and if you sit for meditation, the instant of sitting, the whole prakriya of sitting, the mind is watching. And if you're sitting in this kind of a novice way, the mind is laughing, saying, "Why are you bothering? It's not going to work. The moment you sit, I'll take you for a ride. And I'll take you for a ride and I'll throw you off whenever I want to throw you. You are not going to be able to take me and control me and focus me and this, that, and the other. None of that stuff. Because you don't even know how to sit down. So at the very moment of sitting down in that asana, your fate is sealed, whether you can control the mind. The fate of your session is sealed. So this asana is a very important piece. There's no confusion, hesitation. And slowly, like this, asana onwards, you have to learn the preliminary steps very slowly, very carefully, and very thoroughly, so that the mind, when you sit down, the mind can have some respect for you, because the mind has to have some respect for the person who's trying to control his mind. Okay. Now, I've told you about all these Upanishads, these 10 Upanishads and all. In another Upanishad, this is not one of the 10, but interestingly, also one in which Shankara has written a Bhashya. It is called Shvetashvatara Upanishad. In that, they have explained, so when you enter into this yoga prakriya, what are the first signs that you have? Okay. Lagutvam, Arogyam, Aloluptvam, Varna Prasadam, Swara Saushtavam cha, Gandhaha, Shubhaha, Mutra Puresham Alpam, Yoga Pravrittim, Prathamam Vadanti. Yoga Pravrittim, Prathamam Vadanti. You're doing yoga, you are following the Ashtanga yoga practice, you are considering yourself to be a beginning yogi, then you will see these signs as the preliminary signs that your yoga is a real yoga. The yoga pravrittim prathamam vadanti. What are the first few things that you see? So, lagutvam, when you sit, whether you are a tremendously bulky body or you're a thin body, you will feel light when you sit. When you are sitting properly, when you are sitting regularly, when you know how to sit, lightness of sitting. It has got nothing to do with the weight. A very heavy person can feel light, or a bony, thin person can feel very heavy when he's sitting for meditation. You feel a certain lightness. Arogyam. Yoga will slowly help you with your health. Aloluptvam, unwaveringness. Your mind, when you sit and you start looking at your mind, it is able to quickly become unwavering. Mind is by nature, chanchalam hi mana Krishna. Mind by nature has an ability to go from one topic to another. And as I mentioned, this is a good thing because we're talking about a new thing every second. And if you say my mind is unwavering on the first thing you said 20 minutes ago, then the whole session is wasted. So the good thing is that your mind can change. But when you want the mind to stay on one thing, you have to be able to command it and it has to be able to listen. Alo luptvam. Then Varna Prasadam. So often if you look at translations of this Upanishad, Varna Prasadam might be say Varna is color. So Varna Prasadam might say, oh, your color changes. doesn't happen. Varna is the uh, alphabet. So the letters of the alphabet. It is the ability to articulate clearly. Varna Prasadam. So, if you go to North India, where some of us panelists are from, they will say sometimes you go to uh, talk to each other, they will say Mahesh instead of Mahesh because they will not be able to tell Sa and Sha correctly. So that all this, and of course, South India, we don't even have enough letters in the alphabet in Tamil to be able to say the entire Sanskrit alphabet. So we will have Ka and Kha said the same way. So Varna Prasadam, you will be able to articulate correctly and speak words in a way that their sound conveys exactly what the word is. Svarna prasadam, swara saushthavam. Your voice can handle the low, medium, high pitch correctly so that the tone of the voice is correct and appropriate and sweet as it's supposed to be. Swara saushthavam. Similarly, Gandha Shubha, and then Mutra Puresham Alpam, your bodily exertions, excretions will be all limited. So all these are the lakshanas. The lakshanas are the indications of the first stages of purity that happen at more or less a physical level to indicate that you are correctly going on the yoga marga. So this is the beginning of the yoga marga. After all, we are not trying to go on. I mean, remember, some of this stuff comes from the Patanjali stuff, but what I'm quoting to you is Vedanta. It is Svetashvatara Upanishad. So in the intermediate stage and the later stage is what we are interested in as a Vedantic meditator. We would want to have the release of the vasanas hold on our mind. Vasanas are our inclinations, and inclinations have a particular hold on our mind. That hold will gradually get released. In we don't become a creature of the habit and the inclinations that we get from our previous life in this life or from previous lives. And then finally, the mind is able to attain that correct poise and that state which reflects the glory of the Atma that you really are. In certain other Upanishad, that state of mind which allows you to reflect in all its glory your real state, because your real state has got nothing to do with mind. After all, it's anatma. The mind only can reflect that real state, that ability of the mind, that state of the mind, the poise of the mind, the mudra of the mind, which allows it to reflect. Later on, you will find is called Shemushi. Okay, this is called Shemushi Bhava, that you attain to Shemushi Bhava, or it is called Dakshina. So that in the Rudra Hridaya Upanishad, there is a shloka that says Shemushi Dakshina Prokta. So this Dakshina Murti, when you see him, Dakshina, the Lord Dakshina Murti meditating, many of you might have had exposure to the Lord Dakshina Murti meditating with his eyes gently closed and his hand in Chinmudra with a Amrita Kalasha and a Veda and Akshamala in his hand and a gentle smile on his face. That is, he is indicative of that Shemushi Bhava, the state of mind which is fully able to reflect the glory of who you really are. So that is the final stage of this Vedantic meditation. So in doing the Upasana of the mind, here are the stages, and you have to be very careful. As I mentioned, it can't be beat into into submission. So the Shastra says, Lalayet Chitta Balakam. Treat the mind like your child. When you try to discipline a child, just incredibly harsh words never help. You have to cajole the child gently and bring it to where you want it. Lalayet, cajole the mind to come to where you want. Lalayet chitta balakam. Like you cajole a child, you cajole the mind and bring it to where you want. But just like mind is a child for us, at once it is not only a child for us, it's also the guru. Why is the mind the guru? Because the mind is going to take us to the ultimate lakshya. It is the only tool we have, and it is going to be the medium and the facilitator for Brahma Darshanam. So you have to treat it with great respect. And other reason that you have to treat it with great respect is that it has to gradually take us to the ultimate goal. It shouldn't take us to some intermediate goal and leave us there. So you cannot rest until the ultimate goal is reached. Now, when you think about this, you will get some perspective on the way yoga is being used in the modern society. Nowadays, for instance, they say yoga for health. Okay, this is an Upanishad class. You cannot say we are not interested in, I am not interested in health, I'm only interested in mukti. Yeah, I want to be healthy also. But that health is not my goal. So the problem that if you take yoga and you use it for such a limited result, that yoga actually will yield very easily, give you limited result. And since that is what you wanted, you will say, I was doing yoga and I became healthy, I am done. So you soon forget, both as an individual as well as a society, what is the goal of yoga. So practically speaking, when we are going down a road and we are trying to shoot for something, you know, if you shoot for 100, then you might get 50 or 60. But if you shoot for 10, if you get 8, you'll be very happy. So which is the goal you go, how lofty you reach for? When you reach for a very lofty goal, then along the way, even if you get half the way, you will get all kind of collateral advantages if you shoot for that goal. And in this particular goal of Brahma Prapti, Krishna assures us that as long as we have oriented our life to shoot for that goal, no matter how much of that goal you achieve in this life, you will be allowed to continue in a future life in this particular goal. That doesn't apply to all goals. It is not that if you start doing yoga to become very healthy and you achieve 90% good health next year, next life, you start with 90%. It's only for this Brahma Prapti. But if you set your sights too low, you will only get part of the way to that low side and you would have achieved very little. So the goal for yoga is hitatama. Hita means good. Hita means good. Hitatara means better. Hitatama means the very best that is good for me. Hitatama. So on the road to the Hitatama, you will get the Hita and you will get the Hitatara, but you won't stop with that because none of them are the goal. So for the sadhaka, I'm making a pretty important point now. So I'd like us to pay a very careful attention to this. This is an extremely important point. You see, there are three things. There is the sadhaka, and then there is the sadhya. The sadhya is the thing that I want. I am trying, the sadhaka is trying for something, and the sadhya is the lakshya, the goal. And in order to get to that goal, I use certain arrangements, instruments. They are the sadhans. Now, sadhan is a Hindi word. Sadhan, it is the karana, it is the instruments. And using the karana, I do the sadhana. The sadhaka does the sadhana using the karanas to get towards and achieve the sadhya or the lakshya. Now, whenever you encounter any such situation, even in a Laukika situation, one of the biggest reason why people don't get what they want is called Lakshya Kshaya. That means you lose sight of the goal. So, for instance, you might say, I want to get healthy. And the first step of health is weight loss. I am 125 kilos, so I am not going to be possibly healthy until I'm at least 90 kilos. So I am going to lose, firstly, I'm going to lose weight as my step towards good health. All fine. So I go on a diet and I reduce this and I do all kinds of tricks and I count the calories, this, that, and the other. Somehow, yena kena prakarena, my weight comes to 90. Now I have to think, okay, now my weight has been brought under control. What about the diet? Is it really a healthy diet? How do I modify it? Am I getting enough exercise? How do I do that? How do I now take the new thing that I have got? It now becomes, by the way, a karana. My new lighter body is a karana. and I'm going to use it to continue to proceed in the next step towards my sadhya. But what happens is that in the process of getting that lighter body, somewhere in the process that was so difficult, and I talked about it with the neighbors, and the neighbors' son noticed that I'm losing weight and my shirts don't fit, and I'm buying new, nicer shirts and all. I suddenly get confused that lower weight was the lakshya. So when I get to the lower weight, I celebrate. I have achieved the thing that I want to achieve. But it was never what I wanted to achieve. So I don't go further. I get lakshya kshaya. So the sadhana is a long marathon, but the first sprint was an advantage along the way. But my job is to take that in the stride and to keep my eyes on the goal. I have to understand this very carefully and clearly, especially when it comes to Adhyatma sadhana. Sadhaka is full of motivation and focus and desire for the long term goal. And I collect the sadhana instruments, the karana, and I focus on the sadhana for a long, long time consistently. For example, I am going to belabor an analogy. Imagine the sadhaka is a hungry person, and the goal is to remove the hunger, to get tripti from the hunger. So, for the tripti from the hunger is the goal, the lakshya, and the sadhaka is the hungry person. It is not just a matter of eliminating the ask of the taste buds in the mouth. Okay, the taste buds in the mouth, only a hungry person actually can really eat. If somebody who is not hungry, they can't actually do justice to a meal. They can indulge their palate, but they can't do justice to a meal. A really hungry person is the one who can eat. Now, the bridge between the sadhaka, the hungry person, and the goal, elimination of hunger, the bridge is food. There is no other karana. Food is the karana, it's an instrument. I have to use it. To use it, to apply myself to the karana, I have to eat the food. So when the food is presented in front of me in a thali, eating is the only way to use it. So the hungry person will be happy once the food comes. That person, the hungry person, will have none of the picking at the food. What is this black thing? What is this squirmy thing? Why is that cold? Why is that hot? By this very act, the wrong approach has been initiated. The wrong approach for the sadhaka with that particular sadhan. Instead, the hungry person feels the joy of the food in front of them, and immediately that joy gets the digestive juices flowing, gets the saliva flowing, and hence, once the food is placed on the tongue, the process of digestion starts right royally and allows the instrument to be used as a sadhana for the sadhaka to achieve the sadhya. As the food grows through every stage, the tongue, the teeth, the stomach, we are aware that this Anna Brahman is touching us. So eating is the sadhana, the food is the thing, and the goal is satisfaction of hunger, and the hungry one is the sadhaka. This one we understand. Now, what about the food? Where did it come from? Who made the food? There's somebody else. I mean, unless you can cook yourself, I don't know how to cook, for instance. So there'll be some cook somewhere who will be cooking. Now that is a different sadhaka. He makes the food. For that sadhaka, food is not the sadhana. Food is the lakshya. He is doing a different sadhana. And for him, the sadhan are the instruments and the ingredients to make the food. The sadhaka there is the cook who knows how to convert raw ingredients into food. But what if the cook doesn't want to cook? Suppose they say, oh, I've got a headache today, you go eat in the restaurant. So the sadhaka doesn't want to do that, but he has to do it because he doesn't have the instrument available. That sadhaka has the instrument available, but doesn't want to use the instrument. The reason I am belaboring this point is because the world is full of this sadhaka, sadhya, sadhana, and they are all interconnected in a big web. And it's a complex web. This guy's sadhana is that guy's sadhaka, that guy's sadhaka is this guy's sadhya. One goal can become a sadhan somewhere else, somewhere it can become an instrument, somewhere it can even become another sadhaka. So it is a very complex, interconnected thing. And especially when it comes to Brahma Vidya, there are so many different prakriyas, and the final goal is so big that there is no resting, and there are plenty of traps to fall into it, to fall into the trap and get distracted from the main goal. Because the main goal is so overarching, but there are so many things along the way that are supporting and playing supporting roles and subsidiary roles. But each of those things can be very big. Like I gave you the example of the person trying to become healthy and losing weight. In the world, weight loss is a very big thing nowadays. So suppose you are in fact 130 kilos and you become 80 kilos, the whole neighborhood will not be able to start talking about it because you look totally different. The whole media of your community will focus on this. And if you are listening to that, you might quickly get confused that that is the goal and tick mark achieved. But it wasn't your goal. If you think that's the problem on such a minor thing like weight loss and health, imagine how it will be if you are trying to go towards the great goal. Lots of action in between, lots of little failures and successes. The real failure and the real success is only the continued orientation towards the main goal. That is the only real failure and real success. And in that process, you will fail many times, but you have to keep getting up and going towards it without regard on whether you are failing or succeeding in some subsidiary thing is not relevant as long as you are constantly oriented towards the main goal. All the time, you have to have your uniform gaze towards the main goal and not get distracted with subsidiary successes and failures, knowing that while proceeding towards the main goal, success and failure in that big effort are inevitable, but you must keep refocusing to succeed on that. This is the meaning of the Gita shloka, Siddhya Siddhyo Samo Bhutva Samatvam Yoga Uchyate. This is the real meaning of that. Not that you have to be like a stone-faced person whether you fail or succeed. It's not that. It's not the case. So the overall goal is very overarching. It is the Mahalakshya or the Paramalakshya, and there is no limit. It is the ultimate. And how big a Lakshya is it? How big a Lakshya is it? You have to read Bhuma Vidya and Shvetaketu, etc. When they ask, is there a Lakshya? Is there a Sadhya? Which, once you get that Lakshya, all other Lakshyas are achieved automatically. Can you imagine? Is there a Lakshya which, if you get that Lakshya, all other Lakshyas are achieved automatically? Now, I leave you to ponder what that means, but this is the Paramalakshya. And this is Atma Santushti. And it's a very different Lakshya from other Lakshyas. The other Triptis, the other satisfactions have a different kind of nature at all. So in the Upanishad it is said, Sa Ankusha Vishayaihi Triptihi, Sa Seyam Tripti Nirankusha. All Vishaya Tripti, all Tripti at lower levels, all lower satisfactions are tied to an Ankusha. They have a binding associated with it. You have to be dependent on somebody or something. Like you are satisfied, but you can't claim ultimate satisfaction. You can't be totally satisfied. For instance, if the food, you're so hungry, but the food is kept in front of you, if you don't like it, you're not satisfied. You're dependent on that cook making the food exactly like you like it. And who knows what you like? In fact, even you don't know what you like. Even if you're cooking it yourself, you really can't say until you taste it whether you like it or not, because you cooked it this yourself correctly, or your mother cooked it, or your wife cooked it, and she cooks the same thing every time. But yesterday it was so tasty, and today maja nahi aaya. So the dependency and the unsureness is endemic. But sa ayam tripti, the atma tripti nirankusha, it doesn't have that binding, it doesn't have that dependency. In fact, if you look at this tripti, even when you're trying to do tripti for a society or for a government, nothing seems sufficient. If you say, make sure everybody's physical wants to some amount are met, it becomes some kind of socialist communist order. What about the emotional needs? What about emotional problems? Okay, you assume that you please give, make sure everybody's emotional problems also taken care of to a certain extent. Okay, but what about independence? What about freedom? I want freedom. Don't just take care of my needs. So you have a place like America where there is ultimate freedom. You can't imagine such freedom. But not everyone is having tripti there. So if you want physical needs met, emotional problems solved, and full freedom, you might find that these things can't coexist together. So how do you create society? Instead, the Upanishadic vision focuses on Paramalakshya, how to make each individual full and complete in and within themselves, not without any external dependencies. If a society consists of individuals like this, then that society can be stably fulfilled. So the Upanishadic vision directs you. You say, do not look outside, look inwards if you want to create that tripti, which is Nirankusha. So how it is and some examples of it, we will see the next time. Venkat sir, with that, I finish my presentation for today. And if you have any questions, I'm glad to answer.
Why do I sometimes find myself asleep during the meditation?
Why do you sometimes find yourself asleep during meditation? Okay, it's a very it is a very what you call good question, because first of all you must know it's a common problem, huh? So good meditation might mean good sleep also. um, so before you do meditation, please make sure that you had enough sleep, because meditation might be a great point, a place where you will be able to make up the sleep. That there are two places you can make up the sleep that you haven't got. One is in meditation, other is in class also. Class also is a great place to make up sleep, because somebody is talking in a very drony voice, and it is something, who knows, can't understand after a point, so nicely sleep. So if you find there are activities in which you shouldn't be sleeping, in which you are sleeping, I think the most common diagnosis is you probably are not sleeping enough. Now, suppose you are sleeping quite enough and still you are sleeping in meditation, then you have to approach the teacher who's teaching you meditation and make sure he is teaching you the proper asana and the proper things. But I suspect that should you be really keen on meditation, if you are being taught by somebody, and also if you are sleeping enough, if you try to do meditation 8 o'clock in the evening after you had a long day of work in the city in Bangalore somewhere, very difficult to do meditation. So you have to make circumstances have to be such that you are well rested, the body is rested, mind is rested, and then it can engage in meditation. Okay. So I hope that helps answer and provide some direction.
Aham Brahmasmi. If I am already a Brahman, why are we
Ah,
trying to find the Brahman?
I don't know. Good question. This is called praptasya prapti. We have to only you have to answer that. Each of us has to answer for ourselves. I am already Brahman, but I cannot admit that to myself. We're not trying to find that Brahman. We're just trying to admit it to ourselves. So I'll give you the example. So everything changes, the moment you find. So when uh, Karna went to Kunti, to talk to her on that fateful day, He entered the room. If you asked Karna who he was, he will say, I am Radheya. I am Radha's son. And at the end of the day, at the end of that conversation, he has to admit to himself that he is Kaunteya. It could not do it. He didn't have to find Kaunteya. He was already Kaunteya. But he could not admit to himself that he is Kaunteya. It is a mind-shattering thing for Karna that he has become. Did he become Kaunteya? No, he didn't become Kaunteya. He always Kaunteya. He just has to be able to say, I am Kaunteya. Aham Kaunteya Asmi. He had to say, not Brahmana. Just I am Kaunteya Asmi. And he also said, if I'm already Kaunteya, why am I trying to find Kaunteya? I don't know. You have to find, you have to lose Radheya and find Kaunteya. Like that only you have to do for this also.
Living in this world, it is very, very difficult to keep your eyes on the Lakshya.
Ah.
How do we manage to do it?
Hey, by the way, before I'm sorry to answer the questions of this man in this way, but I have to call him by the name of his phone. So, Moto G Mahodaya, I have to call him because that is the only thing I know about his name. Mr. Moto G Mahodaya, I'll tell you, meditation should not be self-taught. You should learn from a teacher. So please go to some teacher and competent teacher. There are many teachers who will teach meditation as such. Patanjali meditation they will teach. To learn, you might be able to learn from some Iyengar yoga or some Krishnamacharya yoga or some person, good yoga qualified teacher. There are many in the cities. And then for Vedantic meditation, the meditation I am referring to, you have to go to a Vedantic Acharya, you have to do Shravana Manana. Before that, you have to get your act together. And all this you have to do before you come to the meditation stage. So please do that. Self-taught meditation and trying to move forward becomes very difficult. It is not a matter of self-study. That's one thing. Now we go back to Mr. Kaushi's question. Living in the world, it is very difficult, not very difficult to keep your eyes on the Lakshya. How do we manage to do so? So this is this idea that you are here in this class trying to ask and understand these questions tells us that you have a very special set of prarabdhas, very special set of circumstances that gives you what they call Advaita Vasana. That some interest, some may I find out what is this Advaita? I mean, some curiosity, some guy is going to tell about Advaita, some Upanishad, some Sanskrit class is there. So you are already, Mr. Kaushi, equipped with something much more than many people might get because of great Punarjanma Punya that you might have done. You are approached this what you call this or other sanstha's where you are listening to Upanishad, listening to Vedanta, listening to Bhagavad Gita, etc. So it is already good. Initially, you inspire yourself that such a great good fortune has come to me. May I not blow this opportunity? Because who knows next Janma, cockroach. So we don't know. So we have to try to avoid that. So this opportunity is such a tremendous opportunity. So that will inspire you to keep the same force that brought you to this. Respect that force of your prarabdha. Feel grateful to that. And that will allow you to stay alert and move towards the Lakshya. And then, of course, your teacher will help you with all these things. Yes, Venkat sir. Aidita.
இல்ல இருக்கு. So we have
Mrs. Kaushi, sorry, Mrs. Kaushi. I said Mr. by mistake. I'm sorry.
Is Semushi Bhava the indicator of having reached the Paramalakshya?
Semushi Bhava is the Bhava in which you are able to know yourself.
Then we have a question um, by Tadvai Adarsh on Tattva Bodha. So, what are Sankalpa and Vikalpa? Is there a reason for evolution of Prakriti as mentioned in Tattva Bodha? What is the reason for assigning deltas to Antakarnas like moon for Manas?
Deltas, I don't know what the deltas mean. Uh, so these are a set of detailed questions on Srishti Prakarana, etc. So it will take a lot of detail to be answer that. So I would not be able to um, uh, I will not be able to answer it in a summary manner in this. It requires some amount of going into detail.
Right, sir. Uh, Thank you. So, Kaushi Mahodaya has asked, will it help if I go and live in an ashram?
Not Mahodaya.
Mahodaya.
Mahodaya. Right. Uh, will it help if you go and live in an ashram? Uh, what will help? What was the original question? Living in the world. Oh, no, no, no. The ashram is as much part of the world. No, no, I'm sorry. This problem of keeping eyes on the Lakshya will not improve in ashram. In fact, it might go worse. So it might, you see, um, running away to an ashram uh, without the without the appropriate maturity that makes it natural, it generally ends in disaster. So I would not recommend Mrs. Kaushi about this, that you go and live in an ashrama. Um, I'm not sure in which country or city you are. If you are in India, there are um, uh, there are our Indian cities are, you might say there are no resources, but it is not there are no. There are very few resources these days, but there are resources. Um, Only nowadays it's much harder to find. So somehow, like you have found this Venkat sir's Sanskrit online thing, like that, you have to slowly look through and find, looking at your local resources, what is available, who knows who, and if you are with a great amount of sincerity and a great bhakti, if you are investigating, you will find guidance around you, and you use that guidance. I would not recommend that you go and change your lifestyle entirely to ashram lifestyle, and it'll be, I think, a problematic thing. Yeah.
That Motoji person has
Plus,
replied.
Mr. Anjulal will be also very upset, I think, if you go off to an ashrama, because you are Mrs. Kaushilal, he is Mr. Anjulal, so he might not be happy with it.
And Motoji person has said that she is Riti and in London.
Oh,
So currently
London,
in
London. Oh, but
London.
Mrs. Kaushi is in Bangalore, so then there's no problem. In Bangalore, there are many resources. So please see carefully. There are yoga teachers, there are Vedanta teachers. Venkat sir is in Bangalore. He knows many people. I recommend that you get in touch and you'll find some people, and then you'll be able to get the guidance. And being so, I'll tell you another thing, Mrs. Kaushi, that is very useful in keeping your eye on the Lakshya, and that is satsanga. Satsanga is very important. So, depending now, you see, in this, when we are in the Zoom with this group of people at 4:30 in the afternoon on Sunday, whole world seems Vedantamayam, and Lakshya seems very clear, everything seems beautiful. But by time Tuesday afternoon at work, then all Lakshya all goes away, because the rest of the world becomes your Sangha, not Satsanga. So if you find a way to have Satsanga maybe 2 or 3 times a week, get together with like-minded people. There is an Acharya who's talking, speaking, guiding, and you get some inspirations that move your mind towards a higher goal, then it allows you to stay oriented towards the Lakshya. So I would recommend that as opposed to going to ashrama straight away.
Two interesting questions are there. Is Varna
Ah,
Prasada also radiance on the face, body? Is
ah.
Swarasaustavam also sweetness in voice?
Swarasostama, so I have the signs of somebody who is looking at it on some translation and telling. Varna Prasada, who says radiance on face and body, I don't agree with that translation of Varna Prasada. Swarasostama is also sweetness in voice.
Next question, which is a good. Can you tell us how you came across your Vedantic Guru? This is just for guidance sake.
Uh, so that is, I mean, it is not, it is a storytelling of some individual. So it might not really help you. I mean, there's a certain set of circumstances. Uh, um, it is that allows a person to come across an individual who, for instance, I'll give you a very personal example. Venkat sir is my Sanskrit teacher. So he is definitely my guru in for Sanskrit. How do I find him? I used to work in industry at that time. We were having some conversation with another company, and in that company, Venkat sir used to be working. So I found him and learned Sanskrit from him. So the same prarabdha that brings you to these classes, etc., that same prarabdha will deliver you the appropriate guru at the appropriate time. So, as a guidance, I would say have a deep faith and deep sincerity and deep shraddha uh, in your ishta and in the grace of the Lord, and then surely it will flow in a way that will guide you step by step to higher steps.
Very interesting question. Can the physical body continue to live even after getting enlightened?
Yeah, the physical body. So there are so many examples. Ramana Maharishi, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, all were all great enlightened Mahatmas who continued to live. So the answer is apparently yes. Mrs. Kaushi feels that all satsangas in Bangalore are in Kannada, which I don't know. Mrs. Kaushi, I also don't know Kannada, but it's not true. There are satsangas. You have to find them. So if you are able to, please send a message to uh, uh, Usha ji. Her name I think is Usha Rani Sanka of the Vyoma Sanskrita Pathshala. She'll be able to point out to you lots of places where there are satsangas in different languages, and if you are Hindi speaking also, then she will tell me, and then I will put you in touch with some other people where there are Hindi speaking satsangas also. So there are many options in Bangalore.
That's all for today, sir.
Okay.
Very enlightening.
Thank you.
Very
Thank
enlightening.
you. Today, sir, today number 10,
I think it is 11, sir.
11, in Anjirka.
That is left to you, sir. We have anyhow given,
Anjila,
we have anyhow
Anjila
given a
Munjuro,
range.
Anjali Munjuro, it might even finish prior. It might be only 2 or 3 more. So it might finish in about three more or something like that. So we will see. Okay. Anyway, we'll meet next Sunday. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Jai Shankar.